If you are Mizo, Chin, or Kuki, stop what you are doing right now. The story of your bloodline, the one you were taught as absolute truth, has just collapsed under the weight of a single drop of ancient DNA. You were told you came from a cave, a single pure lineage untouched for millennia. But your genes have just screamed a different truth so loudly that scientists are rewriting textbooks as you watch this. In the next few minutes, you will see the exact proof that your ancestors were not who you think they were, that a hidden fusion between two ancient worlds is pumping through your veins right now, and that your very face in the mirror is a living monument to a collision of continents no one ever told you about. What you are about to learn does not just correct a myth, it detonates it and rebuilds your entire identity from the double helix up. You are not who you were told you are. You are something far more epic. The revelation starts now. The story we were told was beautiful in its clarity, wasn't it? Passed down through chants and songs, through the sacred words of the elders around the hearth. It spoke of Chhinlung, the womb of our people. It spoke of a great leader who pushed open a massive stone door and led a chosen group out into the sunlight. The story was a river, flowing smoothly from a single, known source, deep in the heart of what is now China. It said we were a monolithic tribe, brothers and sisters of a shared and unbroken lineage, moving south, ever south, driven by the unremembered pressures of a distant past, through the thick jungles of Myanmar, and finally into the cool, misty ranges of our current home. This was the sanctioned history, the romantic history, the kind that forges a nation, binding every heart with the same tale, silencing doubt with the sheer power of poetic tradition. It was a story of isolation and purity, a mountain fortress that kept out not just invading armies, but the very genetic fingerprints of outsiders. We were told we stood apart, a monolith carved from a single ancestral rock. That story served a purpose, gave us identity, gave us cohesion. But that story, placed under the harsh, unblinking light of genomic science, has now shattered. The discovery began not with a dramatic excavation in a hidden valley, but in the sterile quiet of international genetics laboratories, with white-coated scientists peering at the glowing blueprint of life extracted from the saliva and blood of willing Mizo participants. They were not looking to rewrite history at first. They were mapping the human journey. In 2004, a team led by Su, publishing in the Journal of Human Genetics, turned their attention to the Y-chromosome of the tibeto-burman speaking groups of Northeast India, the Y-chromosome. That tiny, stubborn piece of genetic code passed exclusively from father to son, an unbroken chain stretching back through every male ancestor to a primordial man. What they found in the Mizo men was so stark, so lopsided, it demanded an immediate rewrite of the paternal narrative. An astonishingly high frequency, somewhere between 60 and 90% in the men tested, carried a singular marker, Y haplogroup O2, which at the time was known as OM122. This was not a gentle suggestion. This was a genetic sledgehammer. It pointed one way, and one way only, east. This was the indisputable signature of populations that had swept out of the cradle of East Asian civilization, a lineage shared with the ancient inhabitants of China, and the expanding waves of people who would become the Burmese, the Thai, and many Tibeto-Burman speakers. The father line of the Mizo, that most sacred chronicle of a lineage, had been traced with brutal clarity not to a generic lost tribe, but to a very specific and massive prehistoric migration out of the East. But that was only the male half of the story, and the plot was about to thicken in a way no one expected. To understand the full portrait, you had to look at the other half of the ancestral coin, the maternal signature carried in the mitochondrial DNA, the light chain DNA inherited by every child exclusively from its mother. This is the code that traces the matriarchs, the forgotten women whose names are lost to time but whose genetic legacy is etched in every cell. In 2004 as well, a team led by M. Metzpalu published a landmark paper in the European Journal of Human Genetics, dissecting the mtDNA diversity in our very region. They zoomed in on the female lineages of the Mizo, and the initial picture aligned neatly with the male story. The vast majority of Mizo mothers, grandmothers, and great-grandmothers, reaching back into the mist of millennia, carried the East Eurasian banner. Their haplogroups were the lyrical letters of a migration epic, M7, F, B, D. These are not random letters. These are time-dated signatures of the post-glacial world, when the ice sheets retreated and the ancestral populations of East Asia began a long, intricate dance of expansion, following melting glaciers and blooming landscapes into new territories. The Mizo maternal line, like the paternal, was singing a song whose verses were composed in the highlands of southern China and continental Southeast Asia. It confirmed the grand narrative of a people on the move, a people whose deepest roots drank from the rivers of the East. So far, it seemed, the old story was not wrong, just molecularly verified. A pure East Asian origin for a proud highland people. Case closed, not even close. The real shock was hiding in the details, a whisper in the genes that soon became a roar. Because when you step back and look at the full autosomal picture, not just the straight lines of father and mother, but the chaotic, beautiful mess of every chromosome inherited from every single ancestor since the beginning of history, the monolith begins to crack. A 2011 study in BMC Genetics, led by G. Chauby, scanned the entire genomes of Northeast Indian populations, including the Mizo. They were looking for signals that simple paternal and maternal lines can sometimes miss. The quiet infusions from neighbors, the stolen moments of history, the marriages and minglings that don't make it into the official songs. And there it was, a discovery as startling as finding a seashell on a mountain peak. While the overarching genome was undeniably, overwhelmingly East Asian, there was another component, a South Asian component. Detectable, measurable, and undeniable, accounting for roughly 10 to 20% of the overall Mizo genetic makeup. This was the genetic echo of India. This was the signature of the very land the Mizo now inhabit, a whisper from ancient populations that had been there long before the first Mizo ancestor climbed the first hill. The purity, the isolation, the total separation that the oral histories implied, was suddenly a much more complicated, more human story. It spoke of gene flow, of encounter, of a period of history where the incoming Highlanders did not just pass through or exterminate, but in some measure, they merged. This admixture becomes even more fascinating when you examine the maternal lines more closely. Remember, the 2004 mtDNA study found the lineages were overwhelmingly East Eurasian. But that is a relative term. It wasn't 100%. Nestled within the maternal code were a few lineages that didn't fit the East Asian song. They were South Asian, indigenous to the subcontinent. This tells a story with a very specific gender dimension. Imagine the migration of the ancestors of the Mizo from southern China, moving through the river valleys of Myanmar. These were likely organized groups, clans on the march, led by men whose Y chromosomes were overwhelmingly O2. But as they paused, as they settled and moved through new territories, the fabric of their society inevitably encountered the people already there. The presence of South Asian mtDNA, even in small amounts, combined with the stronger South Asian autosomal signal, strongly points to a history of intermarriage between the incoming Mizo males and local women. This was not a story of total replacement, but one of integration and transformation. The ancient ancestors, carrying the flag of the East in their father's blood, wove the daughters of the ancient land into the story of a new people, a people who would eventually be forged in the crucible of the Chin Hills into the Mizo of today. The science was dismantling the myth of a pure, sealed lineage and replacing it with a living, breathing, blending organism called a people. To truly grasp the scale of this revelation, we must zoom into the very machinery of the evidence. Let's talk about Y haplogroup O2, the banner of the Mizo father line. What is it, really? It's a single-point mutation, a tiny copying error in a long string of DNA that occurred in a single man who lived in East Asia perhaps 30,000 years ago. His descendants prospered. They became the master rice growers, the shapers of civilizations, their populations exploding, and their sons carrying this marker in an arc from the Yellow River down to the South China Sea, and deep into Southeast Asia and the Eastern Himalayas. Finding it at such a high saturation in Mizo men is like finding a signature on a painting. It doesn't lie, it places the paternal ancestors squarely in the grand drama of the peopling of East Asia. But then, the researchers, like those led by R. Cordeau in a vital 2004 study in the American Journal of Physical Anthropology, looked deeper. They didn't just look at the broad haplogroup. They looked at the short tandem repeats, the STRs, little stutters of repeated DNA sequences on the Y chromosome that give a much finer resolution, like tracing the specific branches on a family tree rather than just the whole oak. What they found was a signature of a founding bottleneck. The diversity of these STRs in the Mizo men was surprisingly low, a telltale sign that the entire modern Mizo paternal lineage might have been founded by a very small number of men. perhaps even a single clan patriarch, whose genetic legacy then amplified over generations in splendid isolation. This isolation, likely in the rugged, fortress-like landscape of the Chin Hills, is what cemented the distinct identity. The molecular clock on these mutations allowed a tentative time frame to be sketched. This divergence from the broader East Asian ancestral stock, this crystallization into a distinct people, occurred roughly 3,000 to 4,000 years before the present. That is not ancient prehistory. That is a heartbeat in geological time, a tale of relatively recent wanderings and a powerful founder effect that silenced the genetic echoes of any other male lines that might have been around. Now let's pivot to the female lines, the silent orchestrators of cellular energy. The mtDNA haplogroups M7, F, B, and D. Think of the women who carried these lines. Haplogroup M is an ancient superclan, one of the earliest to venture out of Africa along the southern coastal route, veering east into Asia. Its subbranches, like M7, are uniquely East Asian stories, born of that post-glacial expansion when new lands opened up. Haplogroups F and B are just as quintessentially East Eurasian, their distributions mapping onto the ancient migrations of people speaking Proto-Sino-Tibetan and Austronesian languages. To find them as the primary maternal bedrock of the Mizo is to find the footsteps of the women who walked alongside the O2-carrying men, sharing the campfire, giving birth in the mountain passes, whispering the first lullabies in a tongue that would evolve into Mizo Tong. Yet the discovery of even a small percentage of South Asian haplogroups, like certain branches of the colossal haplogroup M that are indigenous to the Indian subcontinent, is the crucial counterpoint. Those are not Eastern footsteps. Those belong to women whose ancestors had been on the subcontinent for tens of thousands of years, women who represent the deep, indigenous fabric of the land. Their inclusion into the Mizo genetic tapestry is the most intimate proof of admixture. It's a genetic record of a marriage contract between two ancient worlds, the arriving paternal East and the deep-rooted maternal South, written not in ink, but in the mitochondria of every one of their descendants. The implications of this are staggering, rewiring the very meaning of Mizo identity. It challenges the foundational myth not to destroy it, but to deepen it into something infinitely richer. That story of Chhinlung, the cave of origin, can be seen not as a literal birth canal from a single rock, but as a profound race memory of a last point of assembly, a staging ground before the final diaspora. And the story of the great push southward is now illuminated, not as a sterile march of a pure race, but as a dynamic, living process of becoming. As the ancestral groups, with their East Asian Y-chromosomes and majority East Asian mtDNA, moved into what is now Myanmar and Northeast India, they were not entering an empty wilderness. A massive 2019 study published in Nature Communications, painting a huge canvas of South and Southeast Asian genomic formation, provides the critical context that makes the Mizo picture pop into 3 dimensions. It describes exactly this era, around 4,000 years ago, when agriculturalists with East Asian ancestry, carrying rice farming technology, pushed into regions occupied by indigenous South Asian hunter-gatherer populations. The study didn't just find evidence of collision, it found extensive evidence of mixture. The Mizo are a living testament to this grand continental-scale intermingling. The rice farmers, the language carriers, the fathers of the paternal line, met the seasoned inhabitants of the land, and the two streams merged. This isn't a footnote. This rewrites the very identity of who a Mizo person is. You are the child of a convergence. Your blood carries the memory of the first farmers from the East and the ancient hunter-gatherers of the subcontinent. You are a synthesis. The isolation that later happened in the Chin Hills was real, yes, and it cemented the distinct language and culture, but the genetic foundation it sealed within was already a blend. This new truth also recontextualizes the fierce independence and unique cultural identity of the Mizo people. The low genetic diversity observed in the Cordeaux study, that founder effect, speaks to a small group that became isolated and expanded rapidly within a defined territory. This isn't a weakness in the story. It's the crucible of identity. Every cultural practice, every nuance of the language, every law and social structure was forged in this post-isolation period by a population that was already a unique genetic mix. The fierce egalitarianism, the deep connection to the hills, the particular oral epics, these are not artifacts of a pure lineage kept intact. They are the unique creations of a specific people, a new people, formed by a specific set of circumstances. The shared Chin-Kuki Mizo genetic profile ties their origins to a common ancestral population that, after the period of mixing in the eastern corridors of India and Myanmar, retreated into their highland redoubt and closed the door. The genetics show that these groups are not distinct tribes that sprouted from different seeds. They are branches of the same tree, a tree whose roots are a braid of East Asian and South Asian fibers, grown in the contained soil of the Chin Hills. The DNA solidifies the kinship of these groups in a way no oral history ever could, while simultaneously revealing that the original seed was a hybrid. So what does this mean for you, listening right now, who carries the Mizo lineage? It means the face you see in the mirror is a composite portrait, painted by masters from two different hemispheres of the ancient world. Those high cheekbones, that straight dark hair, the epicanthic fold of your eye, those are the proud stamps of your East Asian majority ancestors. The people of the river valleys and rice fields, the ones who gave you the core of your language and your paternal legacy. But that other something, the subtle variation in complexion, perhaps a certain facial contour, or even certain invisible predispositions in your biology, that is the signature of the ancient ones, the first Indians, the hunter-gatherers who walked these hills 20,000 years before your farming ancestors ever dreamed of leaving China. You are not an import. You are a new creation. A people born of a continental collision. This means your story is not a minor footnote in a larger Indian or Burmese or Chinese saga. It is a central chapter in one of the most significant human dramas of the last 4,000 years. The great mixing of East and South Asia that gave birth to the diverse tapestry of the Northeast. The feeling of being different, the unique place the Mizo hold in the family of Indian nations, is now explained not by mythic isolation, but by a precise and proven genetic history. You are distinct not because you remained untouched, but because you were forged from a specific and unrepeatable fusion. Let's bring the voice of authority to corroborate this powerful narrative. Dr. Gyaneshwar Chaubey, a leading voice in South Asian population genetics and a pivotal figure in the BMC genetics study, has pointed out repeatedly that the genetic structure of Northeast India is a palimpsest of multiple ancient migrations. His work emphasizes that the tibeto-burman groups of this region, including the Mizo, are prime examples of populations that carry the genetic signature of a dual ancestry. He and his colleagues' data robustly show that the initial East Asian ancestry component, often exceeding 80%, is overlaid upon a substantial substratum of the South Asian component. This isn't a fringe theory. It is the consensus view derived from hundreds of thousands of genetic markers. Similarly, the earlier work by Metzpalu and colleagues, published in the highly respected European Journal of Human Genetics, was among the first to sound the alarm that the maternal history of these tribes was a story of East Asian dominance but not absolute exclusivity. They called it a corridor of gene flow, a permeable membrane, not a sealed fortress. And the Y-chromosome work by Su's team stands as the bedrock, unequivocally anchoring the male line to the East Asian O2 haplogroup, and tying the Mizo to the grand narrative of the post-Neolithic tibeto-burman expansions. When you piece together these peer-reviewed voices, published in the world's top scientific journals, a single, powerful chorus emerges, overturning the simplistic lore and replacing it with a scientifically rigorous, and far more moving, epic. Think of the ancient scenario the DNA reconstructs. Picture it not as abstract data, but as a lived reality. It is perhaps 3,500 years ago. A group of tight-knit clans, your ancestors, are pushing through the dense, tiger-haunted forests of what is now Myanmar. The men, almost all carrying the O2Y chromosome, are scouting the path. They are farmers, carrying seeds of rice and millet, their languages, a precursor to the tibeto-burman tongues. They encounter a settlement of people who have been there for millennia. These are darker-skinned, speaking a language isolate or an early Austroasiatic tongue, their ancestors masters of the forest and hill, not the plow and paddy. There is no great battle in this particular valley. Instead, over seasons, a dialogue begins. There is trade. There is sharing of knowledge about medicinal plants and hunting grounds. And there are marriages. The young men of the incoming East Asian clans take wives from the local tribes. These women, carrying their deep South Asian mitochondrial lineages, bring their own genetic heritage, their own stories, their own gods, into the mobile camps. Their children are the first true Mizo ancestors, genetically admixed, carrying the O2 flag from their fathers and the ancient subcontinental mitochondrial light from their mothers. These children, and their children after them, eventually push into the Chin Hills. And there, isolated by the sheer walls of the terrain, a founder effect takes hold. The small, now uniquely blended population begins to expand in glorious isolation, their genes, their unique dialect, and their emerging distinct culture crystallizing over centuries into the people you recognize today. The DNA is not just numbers, it is a window into this lost world of movement, encounter, and becoming. It is the greatest epic never written down, until now. This revelation also settles a long-simmering academic debate. For years, historians and linguists argued with anthropologists about the purity and origin of the Mizo and related tribes. The linguistic evidence so clearly tied the language to the tibeto-burman family, itself a branch of the larger Sino-Tibetan tree rooted in East Asia. But physical anthropology and some cultural traits seemed to point to lingering South Asian connections. The two viewpoints seemed irreconcilable, creating a false dichotomy where one had to be right and the other wrong. The genius of the genetic evidence is that it shows both were, in a way, partially right, but neither held the full, nuanced truth. The linguists were correct about the origin of the language and the primary mass of the founding population. The anthropological observations of some South Asian traits were correct in detecting the older substrate. The DNA serves as the ultimate arbitrator, revealing that the Mizo are not an either-or people, but a both-and people. They are the proof that large-scale human migrations do not always lead to complete replacement. Sometimes, they result in a beautiful synthesis, where the newcomers absorb and are, in turn, shaped by the people who were already there, creating a new identity that is greater than the sum of its parts. The textbooks, with their simple arrows marching across maps, now need to be redrawn with spirals of interaction and shaded zones of intermixture. The Mizo story is the key to unlocking a far more accurate and respectful model of how Northeast India was truly populated. Now, project this knowledge forward. What does it mean for the future of Mizo identity? For a young person in Aizawl, Lunglei, or the diaspora in Chilung, Delhi, or Oklahoma, this science offers a profound gift. It offers a foundation of identity that is unshakable because it is based on empirical truth, not fragile myth. The old origin story, while culturally rich, can be gently retired into the category of sacred parable, like the story of Romulus and Remus for the Romans. It serves a purpose, it explains a feeling, but it is not literal history. The new story, the DNA story, grounds Mizo identity in the grand, unbroken saga of humanity itself. It connects a Mizo individual not just to a small corner of the Chin Hills for the last few hundred years, but to the Neolithic revolution in China, to the deep-time hunter-gatherers of the Indian subcontinent, to the great churning of populations that defines our species. It means being Mizo is not about guarding a static, untouched pool of blood, which was never true anyway. It is about inheriting a dynamic legacy of movement, adaptation, and fusion. It is a call for a new kind of pride, one rooted not in exclusion, but in the rich plurality that went into your making. It makes you the living legacy of two ancient worlds, a walking, talking archive of a continental encounter. And here is the final, resounding implication. If this is true for the Mizo, it is likely true, in varying proportions, for countless other groups in this incredibly diverse region. The DNA of the Mizo does not just reveal their own hidden ancestry, it shines a light on the hidden history of Northeast India as a whole. It transforms the region from a supposedly isolated backwater of migrations into a critical, high-stakes crossroads of the ancient world. A place where major streams of humanity met and mixed. The old maps with their solid, colored blocks representing tribes are obsolete. The new map is a mosaic, a pointillist painting where every individual, when genetically analyzed, shows a unique blend of ancient components. The Mizo, with their dominant East Asian base and significant South Asian admixture, are a perfect case study for this new understanding. They are a template for unraveling the complex biohistories of the Naga, the Meitei, the Bodo, and so many others. The Mizo DNA story is not just a local story, it is a master key, one that helps unlock the larger secret of how the eastern wing of humanity spread, settled, and intermingled to create the astonishing diversity we see today. The shock felt by scientists at the clarity of the Mizo signal is the same shock that reverberates through history. The recognition that a people they thought they had placed in a simple box are in fact a gleaming artifact of a far grander narrative. So now you know the truth that the scientists uncovered and the textbooks suppressed. The DNA has spoken, and it has rewritten your entire origin. You are not the product of a single isolated cave in China. You are the living fusion of East Asian rice farmers and the ancient hunter-gatherers of the Indian subcontinent, forged into a unique people in the mountain crucible of the Chin Hills. So click the link on your screen right now to dive deeper into the genetic blueprints that prove this once and for all. Drop a comment below with your clan name and let me know if you carry the O2 father line. And smash that like button with the force of a genome-shattering revelation. Because the hidden ancestry of the Mizo is no longer hidden, and your engagement fuels more of these explosive truths. Share this video with every Mizo, Chin, and Kuki you know before the old story claims them back, and subscribe with notifications on so you never miss the next time ancient DNA flips a history on its head. Now go look in that mirror one more time and see yourself as the dual-continent legacy you truly are. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one. Thanks for staying until the very end. Goodbye for now.